I do agree with Michael Shermer in the sense that science essentially is our way of organizing and learning from failure in the physical world, but it's not something that gives us absolute truth.
So this week during our homeschool with my 14-year-old daughter, we kind of took it. We're doing a Bible curriculum, but we took a break from it this week to do something a little different. And what we did was watched a debate between our friend Frank Turek and famous atheist Michael Shermer. And so I'm kind of having my daughter analyze the debate. You know, what was Frank's strongest point? What was Michael's strongest point? You know, what were the best rebuttals? And we're just analyzing the debate. And it's very interesting to me that at one point, you know, you just mentioned this idea of trust the science. And that's something that people say a lot in our culture. And it was interesting because even the atheist, Michael Shermer, in this debate said, science is always getting things wrong. Like he made that point that science is constantly getting things wrong. That's why we have to go back to the drawing board and make a new hypothesis and, you know, gather more evidence. And scientists are always getting things wrong. And yet that was kind of his point, was that that's why we do science. We just have to, that's really the only way. He didn't say it exactly like this, but the impression was this is the only way to really discover what's true. And then he made this point. He said, you know what, religion, and of course this is all a paraphrase, but he said religion really was just like something that people kind of believed, and then science started to chip away at religious belief throughout history. And he was saying, you know, we used to think this or that about certain, like I was even just reading, this is random, but I was reading about the history of mead and the Vikings and how they used to think that when the honey water would become fermented, that it was the spirits, you know, like little spirits in the world that were invigorating the liquid, and it was Odin showing his blessing by sending these supernatural beings essentially to ferment and bubble up the water, right? And so he would say, you know, they used to think that, but then science, we learn about bacteria and all these different things and how that all works, and so that starts chipping away at religious belief. And so then he said to Frank, you know, what you're saying is you're just trying to shove God in these gaps of knowledge that we have. And really science, you know, if we just trust the science for long enough, then science is going to have it all figured out. But the picture you're presenting in your book is very different from that. So I wanted to let you comment on that and see, what would you say to an atheist or somebody who might say, look, eventually science is going to give us all the answers and we won't need this religion stuff anymore.
As a guy who sort of went through the philosophy world and academia, the thing that always bothers me when somebody says in the future this is the way it is going to be is that that's simply something you can't know. It just
Right.
isn't. Now, science, I do agree with Michael Shermer in the sense that science essentially is our way of organizing and learning from failure in the physical world. But it's not something that gives us absolute truth. Now, there are scientific facts. So I think the way I would approach that with somebody who's a non-believer is just to say, what are the core assumptions of science that can be supported if you begin with the idea that nothing knowable exists? You know, the only science can deliver truth to us. Because how do we know? You know, what do we know? How did the physical world even come into existence? All of these kinds of things are best understood from a biblical worldview. In the book, I actually shared 7 different core assumptions of science, none of which you can derive from a purely naturalistic worldview, all of which are derived or at least consistent with a biblical revelation. And if you start with those things, you get science. If you start with naturalistic assumptions that that everything is essentially meaningless, there's no core organizational principle, there's no one doing the organizing, you wouldn't ever arrive at true discoveries about the world. So it's difficult to have that conversation in just a couple of minutes. There aren't a lot of sound bites that you can use. But it's fun to look back at the history of science and realize, oh, you know, all of these people, the father of modern, the father of virtually every single science, or the mother of virtually every single science that we think of today, was a believer who
Mm.
started with the reality of God.
Yeah.